After playing in the Quarantine League and having a couple of beer, I suddenly realized that Wesley So is playing Banter Blitz on Chess24, and so I decided to give it a try and challenged him to a Banter Blitz game. I like Wesley So's commentary quite a bit, so I was very happy that he accepted the challenge and also, of course, for the opportunity to play such an amazingly strong player. I played with the white pieces and I went for knight f3 and c4 as I usually do. And after g6, now knight f6, we reached a position that I already had played in the Bundesliga. And in the Bundesliga, I played c takes d and queen b3 against Gabor Papp. And so I thought for this game in the against Wesley, I will play something else. I will just improvise a little bit, and I went for bishop to g5, which he replied to with bishop to e6. So the old main line is knight e4, and I always liked that position for white. But the move bishop e6 is much stronger than it looks. So this move looks a little bit weird, putting the bishop on this e6 square. But of course now it immediately puts pressure on c4. And if white goes f6, ef6, and let's say takes, now d4 gets weak, and black's position is already maybe even slightly better here. So that's why after bishop e6, white has a couple of other moves, and I went for one move which is not analyzed that much. So I just played c5 and bishop to f4. So yeah, now we reach a position which is reminiscent of the Tarrasch with reversed colors, when black sometimes goes c4. So I was actually quite happy to get such a position. He played a couple of developing moves and now played the move b6. So that's a move which I also like to play with white in the Tarrasch. And now I played a typical maneuver, which is the move bishop to b5. This is extremely effective, a bit more effective here than normal, because I control the c7 square, so he cannot go for queen c7. The other thing to note here is that he cannot go for bishop d7, which is the other normal reply to bishop b5, because then the d5 pawn is hanging. So that's why he had to take first on c3 and only then go bishop d7. Now of course he threatens b takes c, putting a lot of pressure on my center. And I decided, I think I don't have much alternative to just go with c takes b. And after a takes b, he gets a lot of counterplay. He has this half-open a file, and maybe later on we'll also get this half-open c file for his rooks, and put some pressure on my pawns on a2 and c3. Now I played queen e2. Makes a lot of sense. Attacks e7. Protects my bishop on b5, and will put some pressure on e7, and of course develops the queen. After knight a5, I made a mistake. So I think in this position I should just go back, go bishop to d3. The computer even gives bishop a6 as an option, but I think that's a little bit artificial. So bishop d3 makes a lot of sense. I basically don't really want to exchange these light squared bishops. And after bishop d3, he probably does not want to go e6, because then the d7 bishop is very passive. But an option that I would have is bishop g4, with the idea of taking on f3, and then just setting up a position with e6, queen d7, and rook fc8, and later on knight c4. So I think black has a clear plan, but on the other hand, I have two bishops, and I should be able to keep equality in this position. So instead, after queen and knight a5, I played rook fe1, trying to put pressure on e7. But of course, he cannot just take on b5, and I end up with this relatively bad bishop, which is on the same color as these two pawns, compared to his stronger bishop on g7. Also, of course, I have 2 pawns which he can attack on a2 and on c3, whereas he has just 1 target on b6. So after rook eb1, he went for knight c4, protecting the b6 pawn, and I decided to go for a4. He kicked away my queen, and now I played queen to b3. So I think up to here he played a really, really good game. And now he also made a first small inaccuracy. And yeah, the best move in the position, maybe you can try to find it. Yeah, the best move is to go into a8, putting pressure on a4. And the idea is if I go knight d2 to exchange the knights, he can just take, and go b5 because of this pin. So I can't go a takes b here. And then of course I'm just lost. So after queen a8 I can't go knight d2, and maybe I would go something like rook a2 and rook a1, but this looks really passive, and definitely black is clearly better there. So instead, after queen b3, he went for queen d7. Similar idea to go and put pressure on the a4 pawn, go rook fa8 next. But here I can actually play knight d2, which now releases the tension. He took and went for rook a8, and now the b6 pawn gets exchanged against the a4 pawn. And yeah, now it seems that black is still a little bit more active. So he might go something like queen c2 and so on. But I think the position should be holdable for white. Well, the first thing to note is that a try to go for a mate with queen b8 does not really work, because after rook b8 check followed by bishop h6, it's actually me who gets mated first. So yeah, this doesn't work. So I should first create some luft for the king with a move h3, and now of course I threaten queen b8, and he also creates some luft for his king with h5. So I went back, and after queen c4 I played queen b3 with the idea of exchanging queens. And yeah, if you go something like queen e2, I think I can just go queen d1 or even bishop d3 followed by queen d1, and there's not really that much progress to be made. So he decided to just exchange the queens on the spot and go for this endgame. So this endgame is obviously still a tiny bit better for black, because I have the bishop which is on the wrong color, on the same color as my pawns. But given the reduced amount of material here, the position should be holdable. He activated his rook and now went for an interesting plan. So he played bishop to f6, creating a square for his king on g7. Yeah, in the meanwhile, I went for g4 and king g2. Two ideas. First of all, I want to exchange pawns because I'm slightly worse, and if I exchange more and more pawns, the tendency for a draw gets higher. So, and secondly, of course, I can now activate my king a little bit and put it to f3. So now he exchanged, and he started with following his plan, just going bishop d8. So he prepared this with bishop f6, king g7, because otherwise after bishop d8 I would have rook b8, pinning the bishop. So it was important to remove the king, and now he wants to go bishop to a5. Yeah, in this position I probably could get very close to a draw by just playing g5, because whenever he goes bishop a5, and this is something which I didn't realize in the game, I can just play rook to b5. And the point here is that he can't take on c3, because then I get this eternal pin with rook to c5. And yeah, the very best he can hope for here is a draw. So after bishop a5, let's say rook b5, he would have to go back, and then I can just chase the bishop, and the game would end in a draw. Yeah, unluckily I didn't see that, but I went for bishop to f4, which also makes a ton of sense because his king is a little bit unprotected against this combination of bishop and rook, and I of course want to force his pawns on the black squares because then they're easier for my bishop to attack. So he went g5 and king to g6. Played king g2, slightly strange move. I already prepare against rook c3 check and already remove my king, so it's just a simple prophylactic move. And he played bishop a5. Now, of course, this pawn on c3 is hanging. And I tried to go for a very active counterplay with rook b8. If he goes bishop c3 here, or rook c3, whatever, then I can give a lot of checks. And I can just go back and forth, and it's going to be a perpetual. So I think he did not want to agree to a draw at this point, and therefore he went for move f6. Kicks away my bishop, and only after bishop d6, he now took on c3. So actually he has two ways of taking on c3. One would be to go rook takes c3. Of course, the position of both of his pieces is slightly awkward. And I could either go bishop c5 right here, or maybe I could go for something like check, rook e7, and then maybe he's forced to go back with something like rook c6, and at the very least I have something like bishop to c5, and my position would be probably holdable. Instead, after bishop d6, he decided to go for bishop takes c3, and I went for rook g8 check, rook f8 check, and now here I made a huge blunder. So disadvantage of bishop c3 is that I can again put him in this eternal pin with rook c8, but I didn't see that during the game. So after rook c8, I think black's chances of winning are exactly 0, because whenever he goes rook c1, I can go bishop a3 and kick the rook away, but he can just wait. And I don't think that I have more than a draw here, because whenever I go bishop b4, he could just take on f2 and go bishop b4, and the position would still be equal. Yeah, so instead, after king g7, I made a huge blunder. I just played the move rook e8. I didn't have much time left, and understandably, after he had put me under so much pressure, I went wrong, and he could not just take on d4. And the rest is pretty simple for a player of Wesley So's caliber. Just pushing the d-pawn. I tried to get some counterplay against f6, but he played in a way that the bishop not nicely defends f6. And in the end, he exchanged the d-pawn against the g-pawn. And now, of course, my position is just completely hopeless. And he keeps on pushing. In a long game, I would already have resigned a long time ago. But in a blitz game, I played until I blundered even one more piece, and only then I resigned. So thanks a lot to Chess24 for organizing this Banter Blitz. And of course, thanks a lot to Wesley for the opportunity to play against him. So it was another nice experience. And thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.
When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian C.